We'll continue for a bit on the question of why, but not too long. I made some suggestions which we'll get back to relating to Thomas Aquinas. These are not important to remember these fellows' names, Aristotle, Aquinas. The important job is to find out your orientations. That's the question of complexities. I point in other directions because some of you have the time to follow that up. Some of you are into these other directions. We'll talk about that more when we talk about a very general notion of faith. What we're talking about here is everybody. HCE is a set of initials in James Joyce. Here comes everybody. And these 5 whys, these orientations are each of us. And each of us in our entire particularity. I illustrated that very simply by taking that puzzle round the end of a season. Some person might come up with another answer with an I in it. Imagine if I gave it to, say, a Hindu. Might come up with very strange solutions. Okay, so here comes everybody, and I'm talking about male and female. This invariant structure, these 13 elements, these 5 levels, I'm claiming they are universal, and later on we'll talk about that in relation to, say, sacred books. You'll find these expressed in the literature and the grammars of all the languages, the question stances. Now there is a refinement we're not going into, and that is that sensibility varies depending on sexuality. But I'm talking about specific sensibility. Seeing, hearing, tasting, touching, smelling, kinesthesia, without getting into the refinements which differentiate us. I am pushing towards a general notion of intuition that covers feminine intuition. Okay, so this is a theory about being human, and our problem is checking it out in ourselves. Now, this can be very difficult, and I have to push this point. If you happen to have studied philosophy, say linguistic analysis and that, or you are well read in the history of theology or philosophy, then you might take this up as another theory. And then there you are comparing Kant and, let's say, Lonergan. And that's not what we're at here. The twist of this work here is that you are asking about you. You're not becoming an expert in philosophy or in Lonergan. That's a false direction. There's a school at the moment developing called Lonerganism. And you can get very expert in Lonerganism without doing this. It's self-discovery. If you meet somebody and they say, I'm a specialist in Lonergan studies, and they don't know themselves, well, it's a farce. And it's a regular recurrence in history. There is Aristotelianism, there is Thomism. On an elementary level, you can imagine somebody who says, I'm a specialist in Socrates. He's a good man to be a specialist in because, you know, his writings are very small. Socrates didn't write. So you're able to say, I know Socrates' view. Socrates said, know thyself. Okay? So you know Socrates' view. No, you don't. Socrates was talking about knowing yourself. Does that make sense? So it's self-knowledge we're struggling towards, and very elementarily. It's so elementary that you could memorize these 13 elements in 5 levels and get a pass. That's brighten your day. Okay, so here comes everybody. Now, before getting into the question of faith, I just want to wind out the question of orientation, and so to speak, bringing up very basic questions. We talk about these orientations. All right, and let's not bother putting down the question marks. I talked about these orientations the last day. An orientation towards beauty. An orientation towards understanding. These are human. And in present culture, I'm inclined to say they're not normal. Okay. An orientation towards truth. An orientation towards venture. And an orientation towards worth. Or worthy. Does the phrase, "he was a real worthy," make any sense to you? Sometimes I think I'm just talking in a translation from the Gaelic. All right. Okay, these are reaches in us. Reach towards beauty. And that beauty, or that response, is a response to something. And that's something I'm going to generally talk about it as calling. My first knowledge of Canada was the Nelson Eddy and Jeanette MacDonald and that famous song, "I Hear You Call." Okay, and then of course the next thing was Trudeau. After that it was all downhill. All right. Okay, calling. What we call art calls. Okay, it calls you forth. It enlarges you. And it's something we will go into later when we talk about art and religion. You have to always remember that art, unless you're talking about Art Garfunkel, art is an artist. Sometimes you forget that. You're going around the gallery and you forget that these are dead folks talking to me, yeah? Beethoven's Ninth Symphony, that's Beethoven calling, yeah? I hear you calling me, yeah? Was it Nelson Eddy that sang it? Many of you remember these old films? No? None of you are old film addicts? No? Reminds me of one of my favorite stories. My wife told me I shouldn't tell it about a Newfie, but, well, the Irishman who was into these old films, and his one ambition in life was to go to Hollywood and meet these folk. So he was doing very well in business, packed up, took a flight out from Dublin and got right across, got to Hollywood and settled down in Hollywood and hoped to meet the great people. And he didn't really succeed. He just met the doorkeeper of one club. And he wrote home about the great time he was having in Hollywood and the people he was meeting. Eventually, a couple of friends decided to visit him, so they flew out to him. And he was in a shocking state, wondering, what can I do? So he meets them at the airport and he says, well, you can come to this club with me, and brings them to the club, and he winks at the doorman and he gets into this very private club and sits there and has a few drinks with his friends, and he points over and he says, look at Frankie Sinatra over there hiding under his rug pretending he's 30, and look at old Liz Taylor over there, you wouldn't think she was 60, and he's chatting like that, and then he sees Dean Martin going out to the toilet. He excuses himself, goes out to the toilet and says, Mr. Martin, excuse me, you don't know me, but I'd like a favor. Dean says, well, are you short of money? No, it's not money at all, but I'm here with friends and they think I know you people, and if you'd only come past my table and say, hi Billy, how's it going? So he goes back and sits down, and out comes Martin, and Martin comes over to the table and says, Hi, Billy. How's it going? And Billy looks up and says, oh, would you bugger off, Martin? I'm with my friends. All right. That's a reverse Newfie joke. But as I say, I made it Irish because... All right. You heard about the two gates in heaven, one for dominant husbands and one for henpecked husbands. And the lineup was huge at the henpecked husband's gate, waiting to get in. And one little man came up and he stood at the dominant husband's gate. And all the henpecked men are standing there and wondering, how did he get over there? And one of them goes over and asks the fellow, why are you standing at this gate here? And he said, oh, my wife told me to stand here. All right, and at least you got two insights tonight. Isn't that marvelous? Okay, now the problem we have, say, in a classroom is that our mood is academic in the worst sense. And there's a certain artistry in telling a joke, and you can actually step out of your academic numbness, and I can get a laugh out of you. Isn't it marvelous? Now, that's the call of beauty. And one of the problems we'll find in culture is that there's an awful lot of artistic discussion, A with a capital A, and sometimes I push it and say in an Oxford accent, art. And the sense of beauty isn't there. You're reviewing books. I had a colleague once in Dublin University, and he was continually reviewing the books of Saul Bellow. He was an expert. And he came into my office one day and he said, oh, Phil, I've got the latest Saul Bellow, and I've just got my review ready for TS, and the structure of it is this. And I said, oh, would you, for Christ's sake, read the book? Does this make sense, that somehow you're not open to the beauty? You have to write a critical essay, and you're not reading the novel, and it's killing you? But, so there's a problem here of the calling of the artist. You need time. We'll talk about that later. Maybe use a little bit of James Joyce and Thomas Aquinas. And there's a calling to understanding. The galaxy I mentioned. Yeah? It calls to wonder, but some people follow up with understanding and do science. And there's a call to truth. The reach in us is matched by fact. And the call to adventure. Yeah? The man who climbed Everest, why did you climb Everest? Because it was there. Yeah? And worthwhile. There's something worthwhile in the global community, not just of humans, but of animals and plants and stones. So there's a calling. You're addressed. Now, some of you will associate the word calling with vocation, and rightly so. We all have callings. Problem is to find out, what is my dynatype, as Progoff might say. Some of us get disoriented from the understanding which is science, but we move into the beauty of literature, the trombone, whatever, jazz. Okay. So 5 orientations, and the one we're focusing on now is the orientation towards truth. Okay. Now we're taking up where we left off in the analysis of belief. Okay, so let's clear up the meaning of my names for these topics. We have knowledge, which you reach by correctly understanding your experience. You do it. You get your rowboat and you go right round Ireland. And you make sure you're not in Lough Neagh, which is a lake inside Ireland. Okay? you have knowledge, and that knowledge gets you at reality. And I'll identify these: truth, fact. Okay? Now, we discussed belief. And belief I talked about technically as accepting someone else's knowledge. Okay, and we went through the details of that process. And it's quite tricky work. Well, you go back to our basic diagram. There you are, looking for directions. You've got these levels. You are these levels of sense, of what, of is, of what to do, and am I to. Okay. Now, do you remember our discussion of believing? You ask, how do I get to Sycamore Street? You listen, you understand what the person is saying, you check it out. Yeah, okay, I've got that. And again, we illustrated the ways in which you do this. Sometimes you don't got it at all. Yeah? And many of you listen to directions and you know you've a limit of, say, 2 points. And the person is bursting to tell you, and after the 8th turn left, you turn right and you'll see a small white house on the left, and don't go that way. So there are some people who always give directions, and they give you a big description, and you don't go that way, but you go on. Okay, so you get a certain amount, and your what to do question is not following the directions, but with regard to this person talking to you. That's the question of belief. Is that fair enough? That's the stance you're in. The directions, you're hearing them and you're noting them, but the big question is, can I trust this bloke? Okay. Is that fair enough? Yeah? You pick up, say, the first 2 directions, and that's all you ever listen to. How many of you have got that sort of attitude when you're driving? You stop, you ask the person, and whether they say 10 things or 8 things, you pick up on 2, and then you let them talk, and you nod. Yeah? And okay, so you get that far, and you ask somebody. Now, the question, when you get your 2 bits, you listen on, not to get any more, but to get a sense of the person. Do they really know what they're talking about? Okay? Yeah, are you with me in that? It's a very existential set of behaviors, and the alertness. Yeah? And if you're not alert, you come out of a tavern downtown at 2 in the morning, and yeah, you can be misled all over the place. Yeah? Okay, so you're alert, and the question here is, am I to accept? Yeah? You accept the speech of this person. Yeah? You're accepting someone's, let's say someone's say-so. Okay. Is that fair enough? Does that sum up our discussion of belief? You get to that stage of, am I to accept someone's say-so? And sometimes that's best done after they have gone. Yeah? Is that fair enough? Say you're with company. You and your friend are walking around, say, Vienna or New Delhi or whatever. And you stop, and in your broken German, you say, wo ist? And they talk to you, and you're both watching, and afterwards you can consult. Yeah? What do you think? Can we trust him? Yeah? He's standing there with a brown bag. Yeah? Okay. So accept someone's say-so. You've got the say-so, and you've got the someone. Someone's talking to you, and at some stage, you make this dynamic jump. Okay. There's an insight. It's a jump. It's a jump you make regularly. These are jumps you make. I didn't talk about a jump on this level, trying to keep things simple, but yeah, with the what question, there's a jump. It's a creative jump. It comes when you're relaxed, you're not uptight. Yeah. Gets things together. Similarly here, am I to accept? Yeah. Someone say so. You can think of, say, a marriage proposal. A proposal somebody makes to you, say, in the university, you meet a friend and they say, you'll have to take this course, it's really marvelous, it's a bird course. Someone say so. And then there's the jump. Any comment on that? That, yeah, believing is a jump. And it's a jump inside you, and it's a bit like the jump of truth. It's risky. It's not infallible. Yeah? How many of you have done all this and done your best, and yeah, okay, I'll go for it, and you arrive somewhere and you say, well, my God, he made a complete idiot out of me. Anyone been in that state? Yeah? Say somebody advises you to take a degree, to take a course, to go a certain place for a holiday, yeah? And you're there a couple of days and you say, oh my, never again. Yeah? Is that a common experience? So this is not infallible. It's a jump. Yeah, it's the best you can do at the time. Yeah. I'll go for it. Yes. And that yes is a judgment. You get this spelled out in chapter 7 of Wealth. A judgment of the worth Now, I'm not going into all the details of this, of deciding to, all right, believe. Where belief is accepting a truth. Okay? Now, the jump is in our list of elements, and I'm being strict here. It's the 12th element, 1, 3, 3, 3, 11, 12. It's a jump, and from it comes, yeah, I'm going to follow this person's directions. Okay? Now, unless you meditate over that chapter on belief and done your exercises, this doesn't make sense. This is really very heavy spirobics. Okay? Remember I talked about spirobics on the first day? And this is worse. It's metaspirobics. Remember I talked about the puzzle, that it's not doing the puzzle, but it's puzzling about what you do when you do the puzzle. Detecting. And it's very difficult. Yeah? This is slow, difficult work, especially in a culture that invites you not to notice yourself. To notice that, yeah, this is me performing regularly in class, whatever. And maybe it's not me performing regularly. Maybe I'm a very gullible person. Anything in print, yeah? My textbooks must be true. They're nicely printed. Yeah? The professor must be correct. He's got a degree. She's got a degree. Wow. Okay, so that's why I take things like street directions, that normally you're a little more human outside academic circles. Isn't that a terrible thing to say? Okay, so there's a jump, yeah. This somebody is worth trusting regarding this say-so. Okay? Now, I want to move to some points about the basic of faith. And first of all, I've got to try and spell out what I mean minimally by this word faith. Okay, what do I mean? You may have your own meanings, but for the purpose of getting this clear and precise, I'm going to give a minimal meaning to this word. Faith is, and it's not expressed. Okay? It's not that you say, I have this. It's something that happens to you which gives you something. What's the something? I'm suggesting the something is a conviction of, you can either put it negatively or positively, non-hostility or friendliness. Okay, that the universe is not hostile. This needs a lot of thinking out. The jump I'm talking about now that I want to push on into discussing is it's a non-expressed acceptance. Okay? And I can elaborate it on it now in different ways. An acceptance of the universe as friendly, as fundamentally friendly, as sufficiently friendly to permit me not to commit suicide before midnight. It may be hostile in a lot of ways, but it's not that hostile. I'm talking about the normal, reasonable suicide. You can be suicidal and go for it. I shouldn't say that, I suppose. Yeah? Okay, so the conviction that the universe isn't totally hostile. Now, that's the meaning I'm giving to the word faith, and I didn't mention Christianity or Buddhism or Protestantism or Catholicism or Muslimism, Taoism, Hinduism. It's a fundamental shift in the human being which is associated in the Christian tradition with what's called grace. Now, this opens up a whole bundle of worms, kettle of fish, whatever you want to call it. Faith, as it's talked about regularly, is very much tied up with creed, especially in the Catholic tradition. Have you the faith? Well, then recite the creed for me. Yeah? We hold these truths. I'm pushing back now to a conviction that is prior to beliefs. It's a jump. And it's common to all the high religions. And it takes very different forms. The friendliness may be very much not around. The sannyasi, Hindu tradition, it's not that you're in harmony with the universe, you're displaced, but somehow you've got something together. There are the Taoist contemplative, that adds an attitude towards the actual everyday. Some Christian traditions add an attitude to the everyday, and some don't. But it's a conviction of friendliness somewhere. It's best, perhaps, I find it very well expressed by the strange medieval woman in the Christian tradition when she talks about all thing is well and all manner of thing is well. You might say, well, what sort of thing? And what do you mean by, well, no, it's prior to any talk. It's a conviction. And it's a jump. Now, I'm talking about something that is existential, that happens to us, the intimation that Wordsworth talks about, the point of intersection of the timeless and time that Eliot talks about, that somehow you are not in evil being. Okay, now, so that's a vague description of the vagueness I associate with the word faith. As we move through, I will talk more about, say, the Christian tradition. But here we're trying to specify a shift that can be associated with various types of enlightenment in the Oriental traditions and so on. What is it? Now here we're talking technically, and I can't get into it because it pushes you into a theology of the supernatural, the distinction between nature and grace that emerged in the medieval period. My namesake, Philip the Chancellor of Paris in 1231, worked out theorems between supernature and nature, that sort of thing. This jump is recognized in serious theology as a jump beyond nature, a calling to be divine in some strange sense, to be beyond human. Now, I'm not going to push further into that at the moment. Okay, so this jump, which in normal belief is a creation of the human subject, in faith is a creation of the divinity, the unknown divinity. It's a lift beyond your capacity to accept an indefinite say-so. Okay, that's my whole point of faith. Indefinite or undefined, an indefinite say-so from somebody who hasn't spoken to you. When you believe somebody in the street, you walk up to a person and they're there, and you talk to them and you see, are they trustworthy? In the case of the jump of faith, included in the jump is the acceptance that there's somebody there. Now, I won't go into that in more depth now. We're going to get back to it in 3 weeks' time after the break in the midterm. But it's a beginning of a reflection of this leap, and that's why I call it a leap into the dark. Now, for your reflections, you don't have very much reading in that book. Process, page 171, line 28 to 172, and pages 285 to 286. Now, I'm pointing at those two sets of pages, but you can take in the context, okay? And it's fortunate, but not fortuitous in that I planned it this way. The context, there's a large context for this set of pages. In fact, there are all told, I think, 6 lectures in this, the 2 appendices here, on mysterious, meaningful man, and on the dark love of faith about this jump. The jump, the leap into the dark, the leap into the light. And the appendices, you have time in the next couple of weeks to brood over these. But this is the focus. And it is a very ticklish theorem in theology that this jump, okay, to give it more, well, let's say theological words, there is a revelation. And there is a revealer. And the revealer isn't somebody that was there prior to the revelation. The jump is one that reaches both the revealer and the revelation. Now that's going to give you, I hope, some headaches in the next few weeks. The leap of faith, it's a leap into the unknown. It is not yours but given. It's a calling, and it's not basically specific. Okay? There probably are bundles of questions about that, because it's a very tricky point in our course. It's, if you like, the high point. Reason and religious belief. The core of religious belief is a leap of faith, and it's not something you reason towards. Now, let me just be distracted on that score for a moment. Let's suppose, and I think I discussed this around these pages, let's suppose that somebody is a theist, okay? That they are convinced that God exists, and they're not Christian, okay? Now let's imagine this person wondering about Christianity. Okay? So you have somebody, they're genuinely a good, moral believer in God, some divinity, and they hear about Christianity, say from a friend or from reading history, and they become interested in this. This seems very interesting, and you know, it looks better than the Buddha. I got to get into this. So they get into that and they start studying. Now, can you imagine this sort of person who's keen on the truth? You think of John Henry Newman, who we started with, years trying to figure out what brand of Christianity do I belong to. So this person is a believer in God, and then they start studying, she or he. Let's say it's Emma, our lady of the last few weeks. Emma starts studying history and studies the Hebrew tradition, the Old Testament, the Greek tradition, the traditions around the Mediterranean, the Roman tradition, gradually getting some sense of an accumulation of viewpoint, what these people call revelation, about a Messiah, one who is to come, Emmanuel. And it's looking good, yeah? And this is tremendously plausible. And you follow up through the book of Maccabees and then Apocrypha and the Qumran manuscripts, and then you get to the New Testament body of writings, and you find that there's a terrific shift here. Yeah? This is really hot stuff. This is like Socrates in the Gorgias. Yeah? A very funny viewpoint. And yeah, wow, this is really good. I think I'll get baptized. Okay? That sound plausible? Yeah? The person has reasoned their way forward through history, discontinuities. It's tremendously plausible that this guy is very attractive. The whole thing is very attractive. Blessed are the poor, and anyway, I have no money, so nothing to lose. Okay, what is going on? I'm bringing this out to show you that this is not a road to faith. If the person, say, becomes a Christian, and you say, well, why are you a Christian? And well, she says, well, it's pretty obvious if you look at the history of this stuff and the discontinuity at that stage. And I mean, these books, there's nothing like, say, 1 Corinthians 13 in the Old Testament or in the Greek tradition. And, yeah, and it hangs together, and this is really good. Yeah. And the guy looks honest, and he did a lot of very nice things. Yeah. Threw a hell of a party at Cana. Okay, the point I'm making is that that person is talking about being a Christian and not necessarily having faith. Yeah? Faith is an acceptance, a conviction about friendliness, and in the Christian tradition about the friendliness of the triune divinity. And that conviction is an internal conviction that is not based on proof. Okay? Now you've got to brood over this. Those of you who are Christians, it may give you something to think about. When you're asked, why are you a Christian? What's the correct answer? The correct answer is, because I'm a Christian. The correct answer is not a long argument about the Old Testament, the New Testament, the authenticity of sources, the historical relevance, the reference to Jesus in other books, Josephus, all that sort of... No. Why are you a Christian? Because I'm a Christian. But say you had done theology and philosophy and you could talk a lot, yeah, like me. Why am I a Christian? Because I'm a Christian. It's a jump. We'll talk about the connection to scriptures later, but I'm trying to bring out a point about this jump, that it is a jump. It's a given jump. It's a graceful leap. And it's not based on all these proofs. Does that make some sense? Ring some bells? Yeah? And you don't have to defend your conviction, whether you're a Christian or a Taoist or a Hindu. Yeah? This is the way I am. And you shouldn't be scared when people push you and you can't explain. No, you can't explain. Now, I've noticed Christians sometimes stumbling about that, even very learned Christians. And you say, why are you a Christian? And say, well, they talk about the history and background and their family. And okay. So this leap is a conviction, and the conviction stands on its own, so to speak, legs. Now that should create some problems. It's a leap into the light, the 12th night, as I talk about on page 171. A leap into the dark love of faith I talk about in the appendix. And it's a conviction that gives you a conviction about the revealer and the revelation. Okay. Now, the question I want to push now is, okay, the revelation. I talked about the indefinite. What do I mean by that? I mean that the conviction may not have any articulation. Yeah? You're on a mountaintop, you're watching a sunset, you're seeing the ocean surging, you're looking at the stars. The man who wrote the music to Lead Kindly Light was walking along the Strand, a busy thoroughfare in London. And he got this marvelous melody. Dr. Dykes, I think was his name. Newman was later asked in later life, why is this hymn so famous and so marvelous? Oh, he said, it's the music. But you'll find if you go back to that first verse that somehow it contains a lot of these points. The encircling gloom, it's a jump, and it's dark, and yet it's enlightenment. And I think it's the enlightenment that is sought in a lot of these Oriental traditions. Because the enlightenment they seek is not a what answer. It's an is answer. And it's an is leap relating to an undefined truth. And you'll find that if you check out, in the book I mentioned, say, the Zen tradition, and I'll comment on what I would call deficiencies in that tradition later. You're looking for some indefinite attitude. And you can recall the way they give puzzles and koans. I mentioned before about the monk who wanted to get enlightenment within 10 years. The great Haikuin who lived in the 18th century, he thought out the yoke of the koan of one hand clapping. Contemplate the sound of one hand clapping, yeah. Okay, it's a conundrum that focuses you some way. I'm not going to go into it the way the Zen tradition works. But the enlightenment is certainly not an enlightenment that grounds talking. What happened to you? Don't know. Okay, so this leap may have no more expression than the word wow. But that's already terrific. Now, what normally happens is that this leap is gentle, kindly light, lead kindly light. It's not a massive shift, normally. We're not all St. Paul, knocked off our horses. And this happens in some place on the globe, and there are people around. And when it happens, you may already be in a community. It may be the gentle presence of a childhood faith, but it may go in through transitions if we ever get that far to development. But the point I'm making here is that that conviction normally moves into the belief structures and expressions of some local community. Yeah? You happen to have been climbing in the Himalayas, and you come down the mountain really high. Yeah? You don't meet the Hebrew children, you meet the monks in the monastery, and they tell you, yeah, what happened to you? Yeah? So you get the saffron outfit, settle down, settle up. So the beliefs vary depending on the community in which this conviction occurs. Does that make some sense? It's very normal. You come down the hill, the mountain, whatever it is, Sinai, the Himalayas, and you say, I'm really in good form. What happened to me? And somebody tells you, yeah, it was the Lord Jesus. And they hand you the New Testament. Or you happen to be North African, somebody hands you the Quran. Okay, so you have faith and then you have beliefs. And the beliefs are expressions of faith that vary according to the location in time and place on the globe. Now, I hope I'm raising a lot of questions here that we'll get into in our last 5 weeks. What then of Christianity? What of Judaism? What of Muslimism? And so on. Okay, so beliefs are expressions of faith that are local, even the locality of language. There's a lot of work to be done on the various translations, Hebrew, Greek, Old Testament, the original languages, the Aramaic, the loss of homeliness in some of the classical languages like Greek and so on. And the beliefs, we've got to think back now into, see why I call this section complexities. Page 83 and page 203, that's the diagram with the long line, which we're going to work on in about the next lecture. But what I drew out at the end of the last day was the set of terms and relations, capacity, need, so on, and institution, role, task. Maybe I should reproduce a little of that. Okay, there's the first term was capacity. and need. And down here, institution, structure, in which you play a role, and that doesn't have to be play a role in the bad sense. You have a role related to tasks. Now, we were talking about the leap of faith. You have a capacity for it, and there's a way in which you need. Yeah? You have a need for it, and we'll spell that out much more when we talk about Plato's cave and this mixture of props. There's a need for truth. And with human beings, it can be very hard to come by the truth that will make you free. You have a need for a way, and you have a capacity. Now, in Christian theology, that capacity is defined as supernatural, that you have a capacity to be like gods. It's quite a fantastic theorem in theology, that the destiny of man is not at all natural to human beings. And there's a need, and the need is for a way. Show me the way. And you'll find that this discussion here occurs in a section which parallels the chapter 1. Chapter 1, that discussion is finding the way. And the parallel here is find in a way. Okay, and I don't know how many of you can get the pun, the twist of that expression. How are you? I'm fine. In a way. Yeah? I'm not quite sure. Oh, I'm fine, in a way. And yet you're fine in a way. That's this jump, this conviction. Now, in a way, may in fact be a displacement of you. And let's be realistic, but again, I want to illustrate it from, say, natural institutions. And I picked one that ties in with the work we did on the why questions. We worked on these, and it was a very odd exercise and a very important exercise to ask, what is it when I why? Okay? Now, you may discover that, and you discover something about yourself, and that's the way that you are. I'm not talking about faith now at the moment. I'm talking about this natural discovery that you may do if you take that exercise seriously. You find, golly, that's the way for me. It's my way. I am that way. Like the student last night who said, gosh, we should be like that all the time. Yeah, yeah, we should. Can you imagine the government being like that? Yeah? Many of you turn on that dull television program called Parliament. Yeah, yeah, that's the way. Now, if you find that you're that way, you may find, and this carries us forward to the question of institutions, you may find that you don't fit in, that there are institutions that oppose you all the way. Okay? So let's take the 5 whys, and I'll illustrate it from an institution. There is an institution which we are opposing called philosophy of science. It's a major discipline in most big universities. In the post, I received for nothing this big book this week, The Philosophy of Science. It's 800 pages. Marvelous. So my usual, is it cynical attitude? I look up the index. Well, let's see what's under Q. Well, in the name index, Quine, why not? And in the subject index, what's under Q? Quantum theory. Okay, so there's not much room for questions in this book on philosophy of science. Well, maybe there's something under curiosity. No. Wonder. I looked up wonder, and golly, what did I find? Why questions in the index. Wow. It's a shock. Will we check it out? It's on page 322. Oh, now, this is an institution teaching people about themselves. All right, what's a why question? I don't know how solemn to be reading this, but it's very solemn stuff. A why question is a request for explanation. Sylvain Bomberg calls P the presupposition of the question, why P? And restates the problem of explanation as that of giving the conditions under which proposition Q is a correct answer to a why question with presupposition P. And so on. All right. Now, there are differences indicated by phrasing or by emphasis. Why did John? Why did John rather than? Yeah? Why was it John who ate the apple? Or why was it the apple which John ate? Okay. Now, this is an institution of instruction which manages to disorient the person studying this subject from the subject the person is. Does that make some sense? It's an institution, it's a dominant way of education, and it distracts you from the way that you are. Now, I wanted to take a natural institution. Now, you may find that you have now institutions within, say, the traditions of religion that do not fit this leap. And then you find you're displaced within your community. You're odd, you're out. I read a piece in the United Church Observer today about accepting people for the ministry, and one person who was examining candidates got very annoyed with the board because they were very choosy. You know, if the person had a flaw, well, they were out. So he wrote a letter which he presented to them from a candidate. And the letter went something like this. I'm past my middle years, I'm about 50, and I have been in jail, and generally when I go to a town and try and preach my type of Christianity, I cause a row and they throw me out, and I'm not good at keeping books, but I do my best. And the committee said, well, no way, this couldn't be. And then he showed the signature, Paul the Apostle. Okay. So there's a problem of the way that you are, whether the natural way or the supernatural, that it doesn't fit into institutions. Now, in 2 minutes, the examination, I'm asking you to talk about precisely what you do not understand. Attempt 2 questions out of 6. It's not memory work. It's empirical. It's you talking about what you do and trying to be precise, like you would with your doctor. You don't go to the doctor and say, well, my aerobics are going great and my diet is great. No, you say, I'm not sure what's wrong with my elbow. And you try to be precise. Does that make sense? Yeah? It's a quite different attitude towards an exam. It's not bluffing me. It's trying to express how confused you are about your 13 elements. Yeah? That makes some sense? And it's very human. I'm trying to make this examination what Aristotle did to Plato. Aristotle did not go into Plato and write out all he knew. He said, look here, Plato, I figured out this and this and this, but this I cannot figure out. Yeah? What you do with your psychologist, etc. Try it.